everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Journey Purpose. Today I have the wonderful Rosalind Guy, who is a business and leadership strategist. Rosalind, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Nice to be here, Philippa.
First really easy question is, where in the world are you?
I'm in a town called Basingstoke, which is south of London, but the closest town people have always heard of is Reading.
I have never been there, but I've seen it on many a sign as I've driven past. So there we go. Wonderful. You have had a very interesting life, which is why I'm delighted that you've come on the show. But in your own words, really, what have you been doing and why? Let's start, make it very broad and see where it goes from there.
What have I been doing? So my career is very varied, which I think is what you're referring to. It goes all sorts of places. It starts off as a teenager going in for a competition, which was a live wire competition with Youth Enterprise, and not winning, but being offered 4 backers for a business that I put together. And this is way before computers because we wrote it all out.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
What was the business?
It was a travel agency, and there's still no travel agency where I said there will be a great place to have one. So
They missed out.
They didn't. Yeah, they missed out. I missed out too. I was offered these backers, which was wonderful. I mean, I must have been between 18 and 20, and walking out with being offered backers, and at the time earning £27.50 a week, and it was like, gosh, that's a lot of money they've just offered me. But they gave me a caveat of saying I needed to raise £4,000, which is a lot of money back then, in the 80s, mid to late 80s. But I went to someone who could actually offer that money, which was a family member, a grandfather, and he recently just helped out my uncle to pay his VAT return. So it was a substantial amount. But back then, times were different. Back then, girls weren't expected to go off and do all these big, wonderful things. And it was, no, you can't be given the money, because if your uncle can't deal with it, then obviously you as a girl can't possibly deal with it.
Different times. I mean, when was it? My mum only got her own credit card, I think, in the 2000s. Now, not because she couldn't, but because to that point, obviously she grew up over time. But even a few years ago, and this is a slight tangent, but she was on the phone to my parents' bank, and she was doing the transaction. She had all the information. It's a shared account, and they went to speak to my dad. Still, you can imagine she was not impressed, and she excels as a elderly white lady writing very passive-aggressive complaint emails to people to make it very clear. But between the 80s and now, there's been a lot of change. In our lifetime, as a woman trying to do business, it wasn't straightforward, it wasn't easy, and we still have blockers, right? So it's understandable.
Absolutely. I mean, I do remember getting my first car and having to get my father to sign something as a guarantor. So life has certainly changed from a female perspective, where you can go out and you don't have to have that guarantor as being a male family member, and that was really important back then. So being told that I couldn't go ahead to actually run a business because I couldn't get £4,000, I didn't own a car, I owned nothing. So it makes you realise that you make your choices. So I didn't think it was a bad thing. I know a lot of people out there are going to listen and they're going to say, well, I'd be really up in arms about that. But I don't think I was. It was just one of those things. You're not going to get it. Okay, what do you do now? So I just went off a different route, and I started transforming other people's business. Within 6 months, I think it was, I was helping someone set their own travel agency up. So I'd gone through the motions, but I was now applying what I'd learned to them.
And I think it's a great way to live, is that adaptability and flexibility, and it's so important. But that I do think that so here's a question for you: is, did any part of you think this isn't fair, or did you just go, this is the world we live in, let's deal with the hand I'm dealt and let's get on with it?
It's a really good question. I think partly I thought this is the hand I was dealt and just deal with it, because there was nothing to get up in arms with. Girls weren't expected to do that. People in my family were still going, marry you off attitude. So you just got on with it, is to say, okay, that's not feasible. I mean, I had to turn down things like being interviewed on Radio 1, and all sorts of different things that came off the back of it. So in one way, the world was being progressive and moving, and in other ways, it wasn't. So it's just, you just got on with it. But equally, my business is called Unboxed Insights. I hate being boxed in, so I wonder where that came from.
Absolutely. Deep childhood trauma, or sorry, deep early adult trauma, really, I should say.
Yes. I'm sure it came from childhood too, with the era that I grew up in.
Yeah, that's a fair one. So, obviously you started transforming other people's businesses. At what point did you start to sort of look to stretch yourself beyond your comfort zone in other ways that weren't business related? Because you've done a lot of different, like one challenging around sailing, but was that always there from the start, do you think?
I think it was always there, but I didn't know it was always there. I mean, I've done a lot of soul searching over the years, and going off sailing was an interesting one. I learned things about the fact that I love to win. I didn't think I was a person who was like that, but suddenly certain things happen that make you realize, oh, actually, I was being quiet because I was taught to be quiet. So therefore you didn't stand up for what you felt was your purpose and your vision and what you wanted to do. You did, but you just didn't realize there was aspects of you about, I like to win, I like to in competition and that sort of thing. But from a sailing perspective, which is the Clip Around the World Yacht Race, which I went on in 2015. Now, that came about because there were certain health issues of family members. And I went, do you know what? I'd love to go and do what I always wanted to do. And I've only ever sailed on yachts that have sailed around the world. So I sailed on a Whitbread 60, which came into Southampton Harbour when I was a travel agent. So back in those early days. So it does stem back from there. And I went on a sailing trip with the sailors who'd gone around the world on the Whitbread, and I really enjoyed it. I'm not going to say I don't get seasick, I do. But equally, it came back in not a few years later, probably quite a long time later, that someone invited me to go on a sailing weekend because someone dropped out, and it was on a clipper. So one of the first clipper yacht race boats that had gone off to be used as trips away for people, sort of as a travel company. So it was always been there. And then it was like, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it before I'm this age. And off I went to work out how much it was going to cost me as a small mortgage.
Amazing. So take a step back for people who don't know anything about boats and ships. So you did this round the world sailing trip.
Yes.
How big was the ship that well, was it, first of all, was it a ship or a boat?
Oh, that's always a good question.
I know sailing stuff, some sailing stuff. So how big was it? What was the crew? What was the crew like?
So, okay, so the boat, the yacht, was a 70-footer, so a clipper. So the clipper boats are made for the Clipper Yacht Race, who are based down in Gosport, off the back of Sir Robin Knox Johnson, who was the first man to sail around the world non-stop in 1969, which is the year I was born.
Amazing.
But it was a 70-foot yacht, but it's like camping on water. There's nothing special about this boat, apart from it's an amazing boat to go off sailing with a whole load of people. In the crew that were sailing, our team was about 60 people, 60 or 70 people in total. So there were, I believe, 9 round-the-worlders, and the rest were leggers. So they might have been multi-leggers or single leggers. And leggers are people who went from key ports, but that might include 1 or 2 races. But most of us are novice. Yeah. Some people have sailed before, some people have got yachts. On one of the teams, there was someone from the Swiss Olympic sailing team.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah,
nice.
So it's quite different.
I think so. I learned to sail in the army, ironically enough, because where be on the land when you can be on the sea getting sick. And we used to have 60-foot ships, and generally we had like a 12-man crew, and we all did around the world, but I didn't do that. So I spent one of the trips I did was 2 weeks sailing around the Canary Islands, for by at that time Her Majesty's Royal Signal. These aren't big ships. Well, sorry, these aren't big boats, I should say. No. I remember there were 12 of us. I was the only girl. Because I was the only girl, and also because I was tiny compared to like these 6-foot men, I got my own bunk. They were like, here's your like personal space. But of course, it's more like, they call it the coffin. Sometimes they're different parts of it. But so yes, the rest of the guys were... Yeah, the rest of the guys were like hot bunking or on the shifts we were doing. And so people have this idea of sailing as quite an exotic life. And they think of the cocktails, they think of the sun, they think of those, the sun beach combers and things. But when you're doing the kind of sailing that you were doing, it is hard work. It isn't all like cocktails and parties. It is graft, and it is uncertainty, and it can be discomfort, and there can be seasickness, like you say. Even with the best trained sailors, never met a person who's never ever had a touch of seasickness in the worst storms, for example. So, to make yourself this uncomfortable for that long with people you didn't know and in a skill that you didn't have, it's quite something, really, when you think about it.
It is, especially the race that I went on, which was the 2015-2016 race. To give some people context of the year, so in UK political history, the people that people started talking about when we were on the boat, when they joined it, we didn't know who they were. So the UK political scene was changing. It was also when we left the UK in the end of August in 2015 out of London, there was no concept that Brexit was going to happen. There was no concept that Trump was going to be on the political scene in the States. So as we were sailing, those things were all happening, and we didn't have communication as they would do nowadays. And a lot of people will have their own personal satellite comms, but then we didn't, and we didn't pay extra for it because it was a fortune to pay extra for that. So we were learning about what was going on in the world as it happened, but which at least a 24-hour lag, and it was based on what they thought we should like to know. So it's quite different. A few years later, because the race doesn't run every year, it runs every other year, the communication changed where people were more likely to get their own personal satcoms.
So did you leave? So you left way before Brexit was even conceived, but I'm guessing you came back after it being voted in.
Correct.
How was that? So, I mean, politics aside, I voted Remain. I woke up on the day after going, what the F have we done? Whereas other people woke up and went, "Wait, we've done a great thing," each to his own. But at least I had the build up. I had an inkling that this was possible. But when you've been out of contact for that long, and Brexit happens, and then Donald Trump gets voted in, which again, I'm pretty comfortable saying I don't like him. But like, the world really shifted in 2016. So what a time to not have a clue what's going on from a Western point of view. How was that kind of readjustment to, I guess, normal life and the influx of what had happened?
Well, we were learning about how people were having family arguments, let's put it politely like that, about what was going on. And then bear in mind, our crew on board the boat was multinational. So we had Americans, we had Spanish, we had Barbadians, it was a whole realm of different people on the boat. So some people just wanted to know, what did it mean? And it was like, we're trying to explain to people. But also when we were in Australia, we'd started to hear what the news channels over there were thinking about what Brexit was. So you're learning that news that you get is not the same as the news you get diluted in your own country. So already you're starting to learn quite quickly that how we're fed information is quite different. And there was a little bit of a disagreement on the boat about when it actually went through. We're mid-Atlantic coming back to the UK.
Oh gosh. That's a long crossing to fall out over.
Falling out, I suppose there's a lot of falling out on a boat when you're that far at sea, but you get to the point where you're over and done with it quite quickly. But it's almost like you're starting to hear the frustrations of what people think. But to be fair, it was not a foregone conclusion, but it's done and dusted before you get back. The biggest thing that I saw when I came back, now whether this was Brexit or I have no idea, because you have a very different view of the world when you land in port. When we landed back in the UK, one of the things I saw on the front of a newspaper a day or two after we came back in 2016, and it was a police officer who looked like a stormtrooper. And I was just like, what the hell's gone on here? Because there they were all done up in all of there were guns, there were all sorts of stuff, the stuff that we don't expect to see in the UK. And suddenly it just looked very different. So you're out of step with the world. You're out of step with your former life. And I don't think you ever go back to falling directly into step with it.
I do strongly believe that travel and living away from your own country is super beneficial for your own personal growth. I lived in Russia for about 18 months back in 2003, 2004, part of my degree. Very different Russia to what it is today. But the path had started that, 20 odd years ago. But coming back, you get reverse culture shock.
Yeah.
You get so used to wherever it is you are, the norms that you have to build, or the way you have to live to get on with those around you. I mean, for me, it was really silly things. Like, I learned to not queue, and as a British person, that is absolutely outrageous. But because in Russia, they didn't really, like, you had to grade for a fight to get to the front of that queue in Russia. So I remember I went to the theatre with my parents for their anniversary, and I wanted to buy, it was a musical, I wanted to see what the CD cost or whatever. And I remember marching right to the front of the counter, because that's what you had to do in Russia to get any attention. And I remember everyone just turning and doing that British, sucky teeth tutting. I was like, just having a look, not skip, but it's really little things that you don't expect. But thankfully, to my knowledge, when I was living away, I mean, it was before we had regular internet. I had a Nokia 5210 or whatever it was, 6210. And it was expensive, so you'd call home once every couple of weeks on a phone booth somewhere, or you'd go to the internet cafe once every couple of weeks and just send an email or something. But so you become immersed in the media that you have access to, the channels that you have access to, and like you say, you realise you get very different perspectives. And then you come back to the UK or come back to wherever your homeland is, and the world has moved on without you. And part of you is stuck in where you were when you left that country, and you have to do this kind of bringing back together, one, the fact the world has changed. Also, you have changed, and you've got a gap in your cultural knowledge of the country that you left.
Totally. I mean, we used to have a joke when we got to different ports, because when you're on a sailing boat for that length of time, our first trip out of the UK was from London to Rio. No stops en route. So we're talking 5-6 weeks, depending how fast you sail. And each time you dock, you learn different things about what's going on with home, and you're trying to keep up with family. You're trying to feel that you fit. And when you come back to the UK, as around the world does, we're starting to look for jobs from when we get to New York. Now we've got, and that's in June, and we don't get early June, and we don't get back till the end of July. So you're trying to make sure you've got work to come back to, because most people gave up their jobs, but not knowing what job shall I go back to, because I am a different person. What will happen? You just don't know. And you just feel like when you walk down the street, you feel very different. And you talk different. You're very direct. When you're on a sailing boat, there's no time to go, oh, how are you? Let's go and be really nice and everything. No, you're shouting or pointing. You're just saying, this is the order. This is what we need to do. There's no niceties about it. It's not that they're not there, but you can't have those in the middle of a storm when you're doing a sail change. You're just telling people, get it done. And you're just being I call it almost direct, almost shooting a bullet in the way that you shout it, because you're not expecting a reaction. You just want it done. And you're only told if there's an impact from it.
Now, that was 10 years ago now. What changes, do you have any changes that you attribute directly to that trip that you wouldn't have done before it? And as you said, when you came back, what work did you go into, and was it the right thing, or did you have to pivot again when you realised it wasn't the right thing?
I was quite lucky. I was able to return to the company I'd left. Now, I'd only been with them a short period of time before I went off on the sailing trip. But I came back into a completely different role. But that didn't bother me. It's never bothered me going in to do things into a company and you're doing something completely different. That's okay. But this was very much, no, I will do this. But equally, you don't stand for fools very much. You're very much about doing things. So you suddenly realize how you're saying things. Family will tell you when you're being too far direct, but work colleagues won't. So you're learning to adjust as to who you are and then working out where to go next. I mean, I think I was in that business, that role for a few years. It was then transitioned to something I didn't want to be in. And I was just like, I'm not doing it. And it was a real sort of emotional thing going, I really want to stay, but I really have to go because there's no job. But my next job was the one where I stepped up further and I got to a director level quite quickly. So there was a different trajectory of my career than it was before. It was a lot harder to do the little steps before in moving up the ladder, but afterwards it wasn't.
Brilliant. And when did so you now work as obviously a business and leadership strategist. When did that come about, and what was the driver for you to start doing that?
So as someone in leadership, you hear and you know what's going on before it actually is said. For example, as a leader, I knew 8 months out, I stopped being invited to meetings. So instantly I was like, okay, there's a restructuring going on here. So I started planning my own exit, but allowing the exit to happen as it was with redundancy. So I was already planning what the business was going to do, what it was going to look like. So when it did get to that point, it meant that I was ready, but equally you still go through that grieving process that you're relinquishing a job.
And it's a really good point, because I think redundancy can be, really soul destroying for many, many people. Particularly, I remember when I was working in a corporate interviewing someone for a project management role, and he'd been working for the same company 25 years and he'd been made redundant. And he had great experiences, but I asked a simple question of you have no qualifications. Now, there's a separate conversation about qualifications versus experience, but in project management, you expect some certain things at certain points, and he hadn't. And he said to me, I was waiting for my company to put me on these courses. So he'd served them loyally for 25 years, but they'd never trained him up, and then they made him redundant. And that, for me, and I was quite young in my career when that happened, and it made me go, I need to always be the master of my own destiny. I can never expect, even if I'm working for a company, I can never expect them to train me up. It's a hope, but it's not expectation. And so I made it my mission so every year I do a different course in something that I'm interested in or will benefit me. And what I also became very good at is writing business cases to the company going, I'm going to do this course. Would you like to pay for it? And because I put the effort in, sometimes it got paid for. Sometimes it didn't, but I had control and I have choice. And I think that's something, when we're talking about journeys and purpose and this podcast, is making sure that you have as much control over your choices as you can. And that's not easy to do. But everything from investing in your time and money, if you need to train yourself to what you want to be, or taking the life experience to take some time out and sail around the world to discover who you are. No one's going to come up to you and go, hey, do you fancy doing this? Unless, you are the momentum for that change.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. When I look back over my whole career, I'd always invested in training. I didn't go to university when I left school, but I did complete my own degree in 2015, just before I went sailing. But equally, what I did forget when I came back was that I needed to continue to invest in me. What I did do, though, is I invested in myself by getting coaches. And that was the difference and a different shift. Because when you start moving up in leadership, there are less courses that an organisation will automatically think of putting you on. It will think of things that are in relation to managing and making sure you're managing direct reports and things appropriately. But in leading, it's quite different. There is one course that I did in the year leading up to the redundancy last April, and I did a course called Getting to the C-Suite by WB directors. And that was incredibly insightful because it made you shift your mindset as a leader from being in the business to working on the business, which, as you know, as an entrepreneur, that's exactly what you should be doing. And I found that so insightful, and including where you start to look at your values and your purpose, and does that align with the organization you're in? And I was already going, no, it's not aligning with who I want to be. So this is the right route to exit. But it was happening in a way that was a positive way, although a lot of people might see it as negative. I don't. I think it gives you the opportunity to springboard in a very different way.
Well, I think in your situation, you had the foresight and the clarity of mind to go, this is coming. How do I control it for me? And even though it still hurts, like you say, at least you had a plan. Leadership versus management is one of those hot topics that we all love to talk about. In your own words, how do you describe the difference between the two disciplines?
Yeah, they often get confused. Leading, I always think you're directing as to where things need to go, hence usually a role called a director. So think of conductor in an orchestra. They're conducting to get each piece of the orchestra to move together. But each of the instruments is like an individual action that needs to take place. And for me, that's where the managing pieces of managing it. So if you're a manager, you're going to manage that you've got your right resources, which is the people and systems in the right places. Whereas leading, you're going to be speaking as the business. You're not speaking as an individual. You're speaking about the business. You're speaking as the person leading a team. It's not your personal opinion. You are leading and representing the business, which a lot of people often forget about when they step into leadership. They still think they've got that individual team member mentality, but suddenly you are very different. You need to talk with your hat and voice as the business and what the business is expecting, what the business requires of you to deliver.
Why do you think people struggle with that step change from management to leadership? Have you seen sort of repeating patterns and reasons why?
Yes, I mean, coming through software houses and project management and PMO, you see that though, because people are used to managing the project, but when they step into a program manager level or a program director level, what they forget there is that they're actually stepping out of the day-to-day noise, but no one actually really tells you that. And I have to say that when I did that Getting to the C-Suite course, it was a revelation at different points where people talked about the loneliness in leadership, the strategic approach you need to have, which led me to understand about the different voices, which no one talks about either, of the person who is you gets forgotten about. So everybody's happy teaching you how to manage because that's tangible and that's easy. In leadership, it's usually the intangible things that you're actually managing. You are managing for what the board of directors or the C-suite are looking to have, and you're looking to attain targets. But as a manager, you're just managing the day-to-day sickness and is Joey okay, or is Susan not happy today? What's the pastoral care piece that you're doing? The leading is very different, and it's rare that I've seen anybody teach it. And it's almost like people in leadership sometimes don't share the experience of what they've gone through, about what they don't want others to go through. So I found it very interesting. Stepping outside to become a trustee and maybe in the future becoming a non-exec director, again, that gives you a very different view of always thinking bigger picture, which again, a lot of people don't think bigger picture. They look down at their feet is what I call it. But when you're leading, you're looking at the horizon, you're looking to see what goes there. And the people who are managing are the people who look at their feet and take the steps to that, or help to lead them there.
I love that distinction. I also, and I think you make a really good point. It's leadership isn't always taught. So I mean, the army teaches leadership, or again, but I remember the first corporate job I had after the army, I literally wanted to shake some people and go, no one's actually trying to kill you. Because, you know, the stepping up, being proactive, taking control, all the things that the army teaches you, it works very well when you're in a bubble with a hierarchy, because the rank structure does make a difference. I mean, even I was in the intelligence corps, I mean, most of my career, and the hierarchy is a bit more fluid because of the jobs that we do, but there is still a hierarchy. And when it comes to the basic things, you know, you respond to the highest rank. People outside of that bubble don't always respond to the highest rank. And that's actually right, because I don't think that's always a healthy way of being anyway. But finding the right community forum to teach you how to lead, and how to lead with people who are often or sometimes not willing, recognizing that actually they've got life stuff happening as well, and that distracts them, recognizing that they don't care about the business the way you do, because they're looking at their feet, like they say. It definitely is a gap. And is that something that, well, one of the reasons, like, sort of you were drawn to the leadership side of things in your own business?
Yes, because I see leadership is very collaborative, but equally it's the translator for what is supposed to be disseminated as the leadership KPIs of what the board is looking for. And I find that there are far too many people out there who are actually struggling in leadership, but they might be offered at certain points coaching by their own company. But at some point, some people get concerned that if this is the coach that's offered by the company, this isn't agnostic to the company, and maybe something might be shared about how I'm sharing it. Because sometimes in leadership, you are playing a political game. You don't mean to, but you're not in a team now who's got everybody's back. Everyone in their departments has got their own strategic pieces that they need to bring together. So you have to be careful how you're perceived based on how you're presenting yourself. So for me, coaching is the ability to give people the freedom to talk, but equally to step outside of what they've just said and say, okay, what does that actually mean? You're not in that work environment now. Let's look back at it and see what the other view is. Because sometimes when you're in that heated environment, or you're in an overwhelm or potential burnout, you need to have that agnostic view and someone to say, hey, what about if you looked at this differently?
I love that. It's something I was talking to someone else quite recently, is that thinking time. Too often, particularly, and again, going back to managers are often in that react and respond space where there's a crisis, there's a target, there's a deliverable, whatever it is. You have to solve these things now or put the things in place to solve it now. But one of the things I think we don't do enough at all levels is having that time just to let your brain free flow, for synapses to be processed, for thoughts to come around, and to just not be in receive or send, just be in contemplate. Again, is that something that you've seen as well, or do you think we're getting better at doing that now in a leadership space?
I think I've seen it done better. I used to work in a software house for the travel industry, and I saw, I mean, it was more of very much of a startup when I started with it. But you saw the way that people reacted. It was more a group of friends, and you were more open to creative thinking. There was no airs and graces, but equally people knew their role and were out to support each other. What I would call a true 360 style environment. So if you overstep somewhere, someone will go, "Hey, no, you don't do that." Even down to the point that people who know me, I'm not great with small talk. I really find it challenging. But I used to have a colleague who go, "Now we have to start with hello, how are you?" Not straight in with the question. So from that perspective, I learned an awful lot in that environment about leadership and thinking about how you're going to deliver. I learned everything about different cultures because I traveled all sorts of places and delivered to all sorts of companies. So you're learning about the cultures. So when you're stepping into a leadership role, some people don't understand different cultures that they may come up against. So for me, there's a much more rounded picture on thinking about how you might present something. If you're talking to someone from India, they might, out of cultural respect, just say they understood something. But as a leader, you've got to get to the point where you suddenly realize, no, they're just saying they understand. So you need to ask about what different questions you need to ask. In other cultures, you can't quite work it out. So you've just got to work out how to ask those questions in a very different way. Leadership, really, that's what it is about, is asking those why questions, finding out what's going on without actually dipping into the detail and doing. Now, we're all, as leaders, in danger, and we do at times dip into the detail and start doing, when actually we should step back and sit on the periphery and help to guide and cajole and get people to where they need to be. But I think there's a lot of people who don't get that. I mean, I was speaking to someone recently and they were telling me that it was a new job, and when I was asking how long have they been in the job, and it was several years, and it was like, it's not new then.
Definitely not you.
But this is where people have been put into roles and they haven't been supported into that role to feel that it belongs to them and what they can do with that role. Because often as leaders, you step into a role and you're given the vision that you need to deliver by. They might give you a 30, 60, 90-day plan. They may not. But in that, there needs to be, what can you step up and do without actually asking? Because when you're in a leadership role, it's no longer about asking if you can do something. You're supposed to be going in, this is what I'm proposing, this is what I think of the options A, B, and C, and this is how we're going to deliver something. But people don't often get that, as the person I spoke to, and it's a shame, because it means that you've probably put someone who could excel if they've given that guidance. Or were they someone who probably should have stayed at a different level? Because it's not all about moving everybody up the career ladder, because sometimes people are better in the role that they're in.
Very, very true. So what's your next challenge for you? How do you see, how's your personal leadership and growth going?
My personal leadership, it's going quite differently, because working for yourself, you've got to make sure you're out and about. I'm learning to do more on selling. So I'm learning other skills in leadership. Equally, I think at some point I may get someone else to help with that. But it's learning where you can leverage your time better. Are you better at doing all your social media, or should you get someone else in to do it? And I think that's the piece that I'm leveraging, and that's what I'm loving, working with the small businesses. And when I talk about small businesses, under 100 headcount or less, and it's talking to them about what are they leveraging with their time, when are they relinquishing their control. And I'm looking at myself now going, I need to have that in place. And my first hire was a VA.
Me too. I love my VA.
Best hire ever.
Funny enough, she does my podcast editing for me. That's why I started with her. And I've just asked her to take over my social media. And I'm like, why didn't I do this ages ago? And I know why. It's because I feel like I have to, as a business owner, do everything myself. And she did the first, literally today, we had the first set of things that she created for me. I have no design eye. She does. She's motivated. I was like, why did I hold off so long doing this? And I've had her for 9-10 months now, and I've only just got around to giving this work to her. So yes, I love my VA. But like you say, I think there's something about understanding that you have to let go to grow, and letting go is not easy when it's your own business and your own baby. But you can't grow without it after a certain point, I think.
No, I completely agree. But I learned through the last company I was with, particularly through COVID, restructured during month late. So literally, was it March we went into lockdown of 2020, and I think in May is when we restructured, and the amount of hours we were doing, because we were doing payroll services.
Gosh.
Globally, we learned what the weird and wacky was going on in every country to do with everybody. So, and none of it was really payroll related, but it all impacted. But what I learned there is that in order to support people through a lot, you had to give a lot. And when I stepped into running my own business, the importance is structuring my day and putting the boundaries in place and saying, this is what it's acceptable to do and this is what's not.
Definitely. Rosalind, if people want to find you, work with you, chat with you, hang out, how can they do that?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn as Rosalind Guy, and but you can also find me on unboxedinsights.com, and there's my other social media that is there as well. And if anyone wants to drop me a line, I can let them into the free community that I have for leadership as well.
Sounds amazing. Thank you. I think what you've done is fantastic. And I'm so pleased that from the start of being told that women can't do business to where you are now, the world has changed and we are proving many people wrong, and we'll keep doing so. So thank you so much.
No problem. It's been great chatting to you today.